All right, hello everyone. We are back. I am doing an interview today with someone who is researching psychology, and she's going to tell us a lot more about all the things that she's researching, which is really awesome. And so we're going to say hi to Miss Mikayla Shea.
Hi.
All right, so do you want to be called Miss Shea or Mikayla? Which one?
Either one is fine.
All right, sounds good. So I'm going to pull up my questions right now. But while I do that, do you want to tell us a little bit about psychology in itself, the field?
Sure. So, psychology is kind of a really big category. So, it's the study of kind of like just like the mind, behavior, kind of like your own thoughts, and then how you kind of show your thoughts to the world, kind of like your own actions, behaviors, and attitudes that you put out. So, there are different little like categories inside of psychology. So, there's social psychology, which is the understanding of how we talk to and like react to other people. There's clinical psychology, which is when you go and like see a therapist and you talk to someone and they help you work through whatever you're going through in your life. And right now I'm doing experimental psychology, which is looking at, you kind of have a question in your mind and you try and answer that question by doing an experiment.
Awesome. Awesome. So, did you have any experience in the other fields of psychology, or are you sticking pretty much specifically to experimental psychology?
So I do have experience with clinical psychology. I am not a clinician. That is kind of my goal, is to be able to research kind of the mental illness side and understand it better. So it still has that experimental side, but also helping people at the same time. Right now, I'm actually a crisis counselor online. So if you're going through something really hard, you can text someone, and I'm one of the people that answer, and I can help you through an issue.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So, what inspired you to study psychology in general?
So I originally did not want to study psychology. I wanted to be a veterinarian and I wanted to be a wildlife biologist and I wanted to work with gray wolves. That was my goal in life, was to study and research gray wolves, help them come back into like Yosemite and all those kind of different areas and kind of flourish and help the environment by adding in gray wolves. So that was what I wanted to do. And then I took a psychology class. I was like, oh shoot, I loved it. The reason why I actually didn't want to do it was because my entire family does psychology.
Mm,
So I have my grandpa does research with children, and so he looks at kind of like how they grow and how they develop, how their mind develops. My grandma did clinical psychology, so she helps people. My mom did the same. And then both my aunt and my uncle are neuropsychologists. So that means they study specifically how the brain works. And so when you kind of do anything, your brain fires different messages. And so they study what messages your brain fires and kind of where in your brain they fire. So I wanted to be different. I did not want to do what my family was doing, but I took a psychology class and I loved it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take another one, see how I like it. Took another one, I loved it. And then that kind of led me to being able to kind of choose a better area that I liked. So that was the experimental side as well as the clinical side.
that's really cool. And you're doing some research right now that kind of brings together the two things that you want it to do, what you originally wanted to do and what you're now doing, where you seem to care very much about nature.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and now you're doing psychology and you care about that a lot too. And so you decided to research something that kind of brings them both together. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, what were you doing, or what do you do?
So I am researching mindfulness. And so mindfulness is kind of your own awareness of what is going on around you and also what is going on inside your body. So what you're feeling, not only like your shirt or like your jeans or like any of that, but what you're feeling inside and kind of what your body is telling you. But also kind of like right now I notice like my air conditioning is going, like that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I'm looking at, but I'm also looking at how that mindfulness affects how we as people kind of engage in certain behaviors that are more beneficial to the environment. So recycling, composting, like if you ride your bike to class or to school, that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow. So we've actually talked about the 3 R's in class: reduce, reuse, recycle. So we have a basic idea of how we can help our environment. What ways do you expect your study to help people see more about how they can help the environment?
So kind of like I did a lot of background research, and so that's kind of needed in order to formulate kind of like this big idea of like what I wanted to see. And so I did a lot of background research, and basically all that it says is that people who are more mindful engage in more behaviors that are beneficial for the environment. But
Hmm.
I wanted to see kind of like if just doing a short term kind of one practice can influence people to want to do more. And so now, kind of like after I have done that, this is Winnie, by the way, she might appear. Um, so once I kind of established that, like, I wanted to see if just a short term works, and I also want to see how much mindfulness and how long you have to practice in order to see change in behavior, not just change in your desire to engage in these behaviors.
Oh, wow. Okay. So a measurement of their mindfulness is more just how much they care about the environment. It's not as much their action, but more what they care about.
So, what I looked at was their desire to do these behaviors because I could not look at if, let's say, you follow instructions for 12 minutes, if that makes you recycle afterwards. Like, it just kind of wasn't fitting quite like that. And so, what I looked at was if you listen to these instructions and follow along for 12 minutes, does that make you want to do these behaviors?
Hmm.
And so once I saw like, okay, people kind of want to do these, um, to what extent do they have to continually do this practice in order to see that change in their behavior to do these behaviors?
Wow. That's really cool. Okay. So how might children be able to take on traits of mindfulness in their everyday lives? Because it seems like mindfulness does lead to some pretty beneficial abilities or lifestyles.
So one of the ones, so I also work with kids. One of the ones that I have them practice, it's called 5 4 3 2 1. It's basically kind of like an introduction to mindfulness. So you close your eyes, you sit down, you put your feet on the ground, and you try and think of 5 things that you currently feel like you're that are touching you right now. So I would feel my feet on the floor, I feel my shirt on my skin, things like that. And then it's 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can smell, 2 things that you taste, and then 1 thing that you love that is going around you right now.
Wow.
So that's kind of one thing that can introduce you to mindfulness.
I might have to use that in my class, actually. That's a really good idea. And we're actually doing some things in school about empathy and uh, just being kind to one another. We use what's called second step, which is really cool. But I think that having that knowledge about mindfulness or thinking through, what things make you happy can really help, especially as you're growing and developing your own mind. So thank you for sharing that. That's actually really, really helpful. Okay, so more on your project specifically. You've kind of talked about the goal of your project, but where did you get the idea, and how did it kind of enhance your goal, or how did it create the goal of your project?
So funny enough, I didn't want to study necessarily the environment initially, or kind of how or behaviors that we can do to like help the environment. I wanted to study more mindfulness and see how that affects behavior and how that can change behavior. So I work closely with my teacher, and she's called my advisor, and her name is Dr. Christy Scollin, and she kind of works with me one-on-one about my research. So she kind of helped me look at something that she knew really well. So she didn't really know mindfulness, but she knew it's called ecopsych, so ecological psychology. So looking at the environment and the psychology of how we interact with the environment. So she knew kind of that area a little bit more. And she knew that mindfulness can affect how we behave with the environment. So she asked me if I wanted to look at that. And at first I was just like, no, I'm not too sure about that. Like, it's not something that I really knew about. And so she gave me like kind of a little paper to read. And so after reading that, I was like, okay, I can see how mindfulness can relate to this. And so I continued, and I was like, okay, let me read a few more. And then let me read a few more. Eventually I got this idea of, okay, all of these are looking at a measure of how mindful people are overall. So this is called trait mindfulness. So it's kind of generally how mindful you are, not like in one specific moment, but kind of just over your life, how mindful are you? And so all of them were looking at this trait mindfulness. And I wanted to look at like, okay, but can we have people practice it and put them into a mindful state? So in the moment, have them be mindful and see how that affects behavior.
So state mindfulness specifically, can you define that?
So it's kind of just like right now, I would say I'm not very mindful because I'm just kind of focusing on one thing. But to be in a mindful state, that's kind of just like in that moment, I'm aware of kind of everything that's going on around me, what I'm feeling, what noises are happening, what's moving, that kind of stuff. So if like a state of mindfulness is kind of just being aware.
So would an example of state mindfulness be like the mindfulness you get from doing things like meditation?
That puts you into a mindful state, yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. I lost my questions. Hold on.
Give me a second to drink.
Okay. So what were the steps you had to take in order to get your project approved?
So it's kind of a long process. So my study actually has 3 different steps in it. So I had what is called a pilot study. It's kind of this initial test to see if my idea works, just generally if it can hold up. Like if people are mindful around me. Like that's kind of the plain test that we were just starting off with. Are people in this area that I live mindful? Like that was just the test.
Right.
And looking at if we do this practice, does it get people to be more mindful in this moment? And then after that, okay, we got people to be more mindful in the moment. Let's see how this changes behavior or can change behavior. So it was kind of this 3-step process, and each one of those steps needed to be approved. So my first initial was just online. And so it's like a simple little, like, I'm going to click a couple answers and you're done. That one was pretty quick. All I had to do So it's called the Institutional Review Board. They look over every single piece of research that is going on that is connected with Western Washington University. So I sent them kind of the questions that I was using, my general study question, my hypotheses, and then basically saying that I'm not going to do any harm by asking these questions. So that's kind of the main reason that they're doing it, is making sure there is no way that participants can be harmed.
That makes sense.
If there could be some harm, if the good outweighs the bad.
I see. I see. So, I mean, because the people that you work with, they are live test subjects, technically, right?
They are human beings. So there are psychology students right now. So they are taking either introductory psychology or it's called like 200 level classes. So it gets a little more specific. So like social psychology, neuropsychology, that kind of stuff. Those little more specific classes. Part of what they have to do for the class is be a research participant.
Yeah.
So in research for us.
I remember I took a psychology class in college as well, and I had to do at least I think 3 research studies, so I had to be a test subject, and it was actually kind of fun. It was like I got to take surveys and be part of interviews, and it was pretty cool.
Online ones are really nice and easy to get approved. It is called expedited approval. And so when I first submitted it, I sent in my questions and I said, this is what I'm going to be asking participants. It's going to be all online, and they're going to have a consent form. So people have to agree to participate. That's the big one. We can't force people to participate in a study. And an hour later, I got approval and I was able to set up my study and get it running. The one that I had to do in person, that took close to 2 weeks of emailing back and forth with the institutional review board in order for it to be approved. It had a much longer consent. It was about how we used a form of deception, which is not lying, but it's withholding the truth from participants about what the study is about. So if I were to have, let's say you participate and come in and you were like, okay, well, what's the study about? And I told you, you would answer the questions according to what you thought it was supposed to be.
I see.
So I had to do my study was called Mood and Cognitive Focus instead of mindfulness and pro-environmental behaviors, or
Right.
positive environmental behaviors. So people would not answer questions according to what they thought the study was about.
Right, because they need to be completely unaware in order to get accurate results. So, what was your hypothesis for the project, and how did it compare to your conclusion?
So what I thought was going to happen was that people who did practice mindfulness, so I had 2 separate groups. I had people that practice mindfulness and people who did not practice mindfulness. And I thought that people that did practice were going to be more connected to nature and want to engage in behaviors that are beneficial for the environment compared to the group that didn't. So that's what I thought was going to happen. That was my hope of what was going to happen as well. What I did find was that people who practice mindfulness were more mindful, but it didn't really change their connection to nature or pro-environmental behaviors. So kind of what I did see though was if I just took people that were considered mindful or in this mindful state, their connection to nature was a lot higher and their pro-environmental behaviors were a lot higher. So the recording really didn't, or the practice of mindfulness didn't necessarily cause their connection to nature and their desire to engage in these behaviors to increase. but it was this increase in state mindfulness that caused these increases.
That's very interesting. So even though the results were different than what you expected, you still learned a lot from this project and you still can probably further apply it in different studies.
So kind of what I'm seeing right now is that one kind of sit down practice of 10 minutes of mindfulness isn't really going to change behavior, which is kind of generally what we think, but we kind of hoped that it would at least change your want to do these behaviors. Um, you know that, let's say, people who are Buddhist monks who practice mindfulness daily, they have this huge connection to nature and this huge like engagement in pro-environmental behaviors. So the question is now, how much mindfulness do you have to engage in or practice in order to change these behaviors?
Wow. And I actually have a picture, or not a picture, I have a part of your PowerPoint presentation that I am going to share with the screen right now, just to kind of visualize your hypothesis and just to kind of show how you put it all together. If you want to explain it a little bit, you're welcome to.
So what you kind of see here is that, so it looks like a little triangle. So mindfulness was considered the independent variable. So it was the variable in the study that I was manipulating. So it was, I changed either people were in mindfulness condition or they were in the control, which was progressive muscle relaxation. So it's kind of just a different recording that they listen to that isn't really going to increase their mindfulness at all.
Hmm.
So that's the independent variable. So what I thought was going to happen was that people in the mindfulness condition were going to be more connected to nature and want to engage in more behaviors that were beneficial for the environment. And so kind of what this shows is that there is a relationship between mindfulness and these behaviors, but it's really this connection to nature that truly increases the desire to engage in these behaviors.
And so that was part of your presentation that you shared with your thesis directors?
So I had an advisory committee. It took about, I would say, a year until I was able to actually propose my thesis. So that was part of my thesis proposal. That was just getting the idea out there and saying, yes, you can start with your study. So what happened was I had 3 committee members. One was Dr. Christy Stalin, so my personal teacher and advisor. And then I had 2 more people come onto my committee who had experience with mindfulness. So they kind of understood the mindfulness side while my advisor understood more of the environmental side. So I kind of got both parties there. And then I had to have, or I didn't have to have more people there, but I invited other people in as well so they could understand what a thesis proposal was. So these are people who are just coming into school, and a thesis proposal is kind of one thing that they will have to do.
Right.
So I wanted to show them kind of this is what you'll have to do. So I had about 15 people there. And basically for 20 minutes, I talked about what I wanted to do with my study, and then spent the next hour answering questions about it.
Mm.
Kind of prove that I was knowledgeable in the area and I knew what I was doing. And then you have to leave the room while they discuss whether or not they believe you can do the study. And then you come back and they either tell you you got the green light to go ahead and you don't really have to change anything. The yellow light is you can go ahead with some changes. And then a red light is nope, you have to redo your entire basically proposal and then you can retry again.
Ah.
I got when I proposed. So that was very nice. And that meant I could go straight ahead with my study and start collecting data and seeing if it worked.
That's awesome. Wow. So research in itself is a pretty difficult task because you're kind of journeying into the unknown here. You don't quite have answers. You're trying to find the answers, and that's what science is all about. So I can say that it's definitely very challenging. And what were some of those challenges that occurred in your research, and how did you overcome them?
So one of the major issues that I came across, not really an issue, but complication, was just getting through the application process with the institutional review board. So that took 2 weeks. And so we are on a quarter system, so we only have 10 weeks really to collect data.
Mm.
So 2 of those weeks were spent trying to discuss what I needed to do in order to get it approved by the institution. So that was a major long process that kind of put a little bit of a dent in how much data I could collect. But besides that, the main complication was training people to conduct the study. So I had a few people that willingly asked to not take part in the study, but help run it so I could collect more data. And so I had to train each of them individually on a protocol. So it's a very specific set of instructions on how to run a study. And they had an exact script and exactly written out what to do when, if participants had questions, exactly how to answer the questions, all that kind of stuff. But definitely training people to like the exact way to run the study so everyone had the same experience was very difficult.
Right. I mean, you have to make sure that everything goes according to plan. Otherwise, your data can be completely skewed.
I had to actually, so not really like throw out, but remove at least 15 to 20 people from the study because either there was an issue with the computer or one of the people running the study messed up in some way, or that let's say they decided to skip a couple questions, but those questions were extremely important to the study, and so if they didn't answer them, I could not use them.
Right. Wow. So what did you learn from the outcome of this research? Or rather, how can you use the outcome of this to further fuel investigations in the field of psychology?
So kind of just generally what I learned was that although we all think so the study of mindfulness is really booming right now. A lot of people are saying mindfulness can help your well-being, it can help anxiety, depression, kind of it just generally everyone's saying that mindfulness can do so much, but there's not a lot of research as to how it can do all of this. So that was kind of my question of we know that mindfulness relates to more behaviors that impact or benefit the environment, but how much or what type of mindfulness can. So I kind of looked at first like what area of mindfulness is needed to impact these behaviors. And so I found that observational mindfulness was the first factor that kind of leads to more engagement in these behaviors. So people who were more observant of their surroundings and more aware of what was going on around them were more engaged with the environment. And so like that was kind of the first step. And then it was, okay, we're just going to have them practice just for 10 minutes and see how that changes, or if it does change anything. So what I found was it didn't really change anything. And although it didn't really change anything, now I know, okay, so 10 minutes isn't going to do anything, but how much mindfulness is going to do something? So now it's looking at, okay, does 2 weeks of mindfulness practice change behavior? If that doesn't work, we go, okay, does 4 weeks of mindfulness practice work? So it's kind of this, now it's kind of a guessing game of how much mindfulness practice do we need in order to change behavior?
Wow.
If we do reach the point of it changes behavior, how long does that behavior stay around?
Wow, that's a good question. Wow. So, I mean, just because one thing doesn't work doesn't mean that your research study is over. There's so much more that you can do, and you can expand the amount of time. You can kind of change out your hypotheses a little bit and look further. So it's so cool to see how research grows and changes just because one thing didn't work. We now know the answer that 10 minutes of mindfulness doesn't help uh, fully gain those pro-environmental behaviors, but maybe more time would, and that's really awesome that we can use this research now to go even further.
And that's definitely kind of one of the big issues with not only psychology research, but research in general, especially in medicine research. This is going on as well. But it's called the file drawer effect. So basically, what that means is that anytime an experiment fails, we as researchers say, okay, this didn't work. We're just going to toss it and throw it away. So we don't share that something went wrong or something didn't work. And so that's kind of the big issue right now is people are redoing studies that aren't working or aren't having what is called significant results. So it doesn't work. And we're just throwing it out instead of sharing to the world that, hey, these 10 minutes of mindfulness doesn't work, but obviously at some point, a big amount of mindfulness works. We just don't know at what point. So what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to share with the world that, yes, my study didn't work, but it needs to be that just a short period of time doesn't work.
Right. There can be changes though. So that's really interesting and, should be shared for sure, especially like we as researchers should be able to use those not mishaps, but those I guess unsuccessful hypotheses like in order to fuel our research further. So wow. All right. I think that's about the time we have today. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And thank you so much for sharing about your project and for even just doing this research. I think that it is really important. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for letting me join.
All right. And for those of you at home, you can continue to watch my interviews with people. I've got a few more scheduled. So just be on the lookout for them and I will see you around. Goodbye.